In 1983, a man stood in front of the entire world and showed them his shadow self. Nobody realized it at the time. They thought it was a horror video. They thought it was entertainment. They had no idea they were watching one of the most psychologically honest moments in the history of popular music. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the human unconscious, spent his entire career trying to explain one terrifying truth: that every human being alive contains a hidden self, a second personality living in the dark basement of their mind, a self they have spent their whole life refusing to look at. He called it the shadow, and he said every person who refuses to confront it will eventually be consumed by it, not as a metaphor, as a psychological fact. Michael Jackson was the most famous human being who ever lived. He performed the perfect persona, gentle, childlike, magical, safe, for over 5 decades. And for 14 minutes in 1983, he let his shadow walk out of its cage, on camera, in front of hundreds of millions of people. To understand what Thriller really is, you need to understand 2 things Jung mapped more precisely than any psychologist. The first is the persona. Every person has one. Most people become so identified with their persona that they forget it is a mask at all. Jung wrote, "The persona is a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other hand to conceal the true nature of the individual." Michael Jackson's persona was arguably the most precisely constructed in human history. Soft-spoken, childlike, gentle, non-threatening. His wardrobe, his voice, his body language, his entire public identity was a masterwork of persona engineering. The king of pop was not a person, he was a performance. Jung's shadow is not evil. Let me say that again because almost everyone gets this wrong. The shadow is not the monster. Every part of yourself that the world, your parents, your culture, your religion, your industry told you was too much, too dark, too dangerous to show. The more perfectly you perform your persona, the larger your shadow grows. This is the equation Jung kept returning to throughout his entire career. The saint and the sinner are not opposites. They are the same person at different times of day. Every emotion suppressed adds to the shadow's mass. It becomes a relatively autonomous splinter personality, coalescing into a relatively autonomous splinter personality. And now let's watch what happens when the most image-controlled human lets his shadow out. And now let's watch what happens when the most image-controlled human lets his shadow out. It's 1983. Michael Jackson is 25 years old. He is already the most famous person on the planet. Thriller, the album, had sold 30 million copies. Every record label around him was working overtime to maintain one thing: the persona. The king of pop. Magical. Safe. For everyone. And then he made Thriller. And everything changes. Watch what he chose. He chose to be a monster. Not a heroic monster. Not a powerful monster. A zombie. Something dead. Something that crawls back up from the ground regardless of how many times society puts it down there. Jung described shadow eruption as the moment when the accumulated unconscious material breaks through the persona and manifests. It can be destructive. When the persona becomes so perfectly constructed, the shadow doesn't gradually leak out. It erupts. It takes over. Thriller is a textbook creative shadow eruption. The most psychologically significant moment is the transformation scene. Let me show you what Jung would see. Look at the eyes. In Jungian analysis, the eyes represent the moment the ego becomes aware of the shadow, the moment of seeing yourself, truly seeing yourself, the self that exists in the dark. In Jungian terms, this is called the shadow confrontation, the most terrifying event a human can experience. Jung called the confrontation with the shadow the essential condition of any serious attempt at self-knowledge. Most people never do it. The ones who do describe it as simultaneously devastating and liberating, because what they find is not a monster, but a mirror. MJ didn't just perform a transformation. He performed the thing Jung said almost no one has the courage to do. He publicly acknowledged that the gentle, beloved king of pop was the mask. And what lived underneath was raw and wild and dark and real. But Jung's analysis doesn't stop at the individual. Thriller is about all of ours. But Jung's analysis doesn't stop at the individual. Thriller is about all of ours. Jung described something he called the collective shadow. Jung proposed that beyond the personal unconscious exists a collective unconscious, a shared layer containing the accumulated experience of the human species. The collective shadow is the dark dimension. Every impulse, every instinct civilization has suppressed. The zombie horde is the collective shadow made visible. Every person who buried their authentic self. Every human told to be smaller, quieter. Every generation that passed its unresolved darkness down. They rise. They don't chase you because they hate you. They rise because they cannot stay buried any longer. Jung said the collective shadow rises when society suppresses too much. Here's what makes this analysis devastating. Michael Jackson did not integrate his shadow. He performed it, and that is a dangerous distinction. Jung distinguished between two ways of dealing with the shadow. Performance, using art or role to express shadow energy temporarily, provides relief but not resolution. Integration, consciously acknowledging and incorporating the shadow, permanently transforms the psyche. Jackson performed his shadow, but the performance ended, and the shadow stayed. I am Michael, who contains the monster, and the monster is not all bad. Underneath the darkness, the shadow contains creative energy, power that was suppressed.
Not because it was evil, but because it was overwhelming. Because it was too alive for the world that formed you.
Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Michael Jackson called it fate. He was destroyed by forces he couldn't name. Forces that looked like other people's cruelty, like media persecution. But some of it, Jung would argue, was his own shadow, unreintegrated, growing in the dark. This is not a condemnation. It is the most compassionate reading. He was a human who was never allowed to simply be a human being. From age 5, he was required to perform. Now, here is the part nobody tells you. Because all of this is not a story about Michael Jackson. It is a story about you. You have a persona. You have been building it since you were old enough to understand what made people around you comfortable. You learned which version got love and which got rejected, and you buried the rest, every day, for years, possibly for decades. Your shadow has been accumulating everything you buried. Your real anger, your real desire, your real opinions. Jung spent his entire career trying to say one thing. You do not become whole by cutting away the darkness. You become whole by going into it, by meeting what lives there. What you buried was often the most alive part of you. The goal of Jungian shadow work is not to eliminate or be consumed by the shadow, but to integrate it, to consciously bring elements into awareness. Individuated self. A 25-year-old dancer from Gary, Indiana showed you the moment of its beginning, the shadow rising, the persona giving way, and almost nobody understood what they were watching. That is shadow work, the most important practice Jung ever described. Two sides of the same person, finally in the same room, simply present to each other. The zombie horde in Thriller doesn't want to hurt you. They want to come home. And so does yours. Drop a black heart below. I read everyone.
Drop a black heart below. Subscribe to ErebusVeil. New videos Tuesday and Thursday.